Most people believe they are falling behind. They look around and see others moving faster, earning more, advancing sooner, reaching outcomes that feel distant. And the conclusion becomes automatic. They must be doing something better. So the response is predictable. Work more, improve discipline, increase effort, try to close the gap through output. But the gap was never created by output alone. Speed is easy to misread because from the outside, movement looks like effort. More action, more decisions, more visible progress. But what you are seeing is not just movement, it is direction. Two people can apply the same level of effort and still move at completely different speeds. Not because one is working harder, but because one is aligned with a path that carries them forward, while the other is pushing against resistance. Same effort, different environment of movement. This is where the illusion forms, because effort is visible, position is not. So when someone advances quickly, it is easy to credit their work and ignore the structure supporting it. Some people are placed into paths that already move. Their actions compound immediately. Their decisions connect to existing systems. Their movement builds on momentum that was already there. They are not creating speed from nothing. They are stepping into it. Others begin without that alignment. Their effort does not connect immediately. It disperses. They try different directions. They test different approaches. They spend time identifying where movement actually exists, not because they lack ability, but because the path is not clear. So, while one person is moving forward with reinforcement, the other is still searching for traction. And this creates the appearance of a gap. But the gap is not created at the point of comparison. It was created at the point of positioning. This is why catching up feels difficult, because you are not just trying to increase speed, you are trying to shift direction. And direction determines whether effort compounds or dissipates. When someone is positioned correctly, small actions produce forward movement. Progress builds on itself. Decisions connect. When they are not, even large amounts of effort can feel stagnant because nothing is carrying it forward. There is no underlying momentum. So the difference begins to widen, not dramatically at first, but consistently. And consistency is enough. Over time, this becomes visible. One person appears to always be ahead, not by chance, not by occasional advantage, but by sustained positioning. They are not moving faster, they are moving with the system. And once you see that, the question changes. Not, how do I work harder, but where am I positioned relative to movement? Position determines movement, but what actually sustains that movement is what you're connected to. Because positioning alone is not enough. It needs something to anchor into. This is where assets begin to matter, not in the way most people think, not just money, not just ownership in the obvious sense, but anything that continues to produce value without requiring constant effort. Most people operate only through labor. They trade time for output, and once that time stops, so does the result. There is no continuation, no extension beyond their direct input. Others operate differently. They attach their effort to structures that persist, systems that continue to move, even when they are not actively pushing. And this changes everything. Because now, effort does not reset, it accumulates. Each action connects to something that remains, something that carries forward. And over time, that creates a layer beneath their movement. So while one person starts from zero each day, the other starts from where they left off. Not because they are more disciplined, but because their structure allows continuity. This is the difference between activity and accumulation. Activity requires constant renewal. Accumulation builds on itself. And once accumulation begins, the pace changes. This is why some people appear to move effortlessly, because the visible action you see is supported by invisible carryover. They are not relying on today alone. They are moving with everything that came before it. And over time, this creates distance, not from a single moment, but from repeated continuation. Each day builds on the last. Each result reinforces the next, and the gap expands quietly. Meanwhile, those without assets remain dependent on input. They must restart, reapply, rebuild. Every cycle begins again, and that repetition limits speed. Because progress that resets cannot compound. It can only repeat. So the difference becomes structural, not effort-based, not talent-based, but continuity-based. Who continues and who restarts. This is what keeps certain people ahead. They are not just working, they are building layers that remain, and those layers begin to carry them, quietly, consistently, without interruption. So over time, the question becomes less about how much you do and more about what continues after you stop. Because that is where advantage begins to form, not in effort alone, but in what effort attaches to. Most content talks at you. This one sits with you. If that difference stood out, if this felt real instead of loud, like the video, subscribe. This channel is built for people who notice patterns. At a certain point, effort stops being the main driver, and what replaces it is structure. Because once assets begin to exist, they start to shape outcomes. Not dramatically at first, not in a way that is obvious, but gradually. And gradual shifts are the ones that go unnoticed. This is where most people misread the system. They assume advantage is created in moments, big decisions, big risks, big breakthroughs. But advantage is usually formed in quiet accumulation. Small ownership, small positioning, small structures that continue to operate. Individually, they don't look significant, but together, they begin to change direction. Because once enough of these layers exist, they start interacting with each other. One asset feeds another. One position opens access to the next. One decision increases the range of future decisions. And this creates momentum that is no longer dependent on effort alone. This is when the shift becomes visible, not at the beginning, but later, when the system starts moving without constant input. And from the outside, it looks like acceleration. But internally, it is simply continuation. Nothing sudden, nothing dramatic, just layers interacting over time. Meanwhile, those without these layers remain dependent on isolated actions. Each move stands alone. Each result ends where it finishes. There is no connection between outcomes. And because of that, there is no multiplication, only repetition. Work, result, reset. Work, result, reset. The cycle continues. But once accumulation exists, the cycle changes. Work, result, builds. Work, result, builds further. Each step extends the last. This is where the gap starts to widen more noticeably. Not because one person increased effort, but because one person's effort is now being multiplied. And multiplication changes scale. At this stage, even small actions can produce larger outcomes because they are supported, carried, extended. And that support is what most people don't see. They see results. They don't see the structure behind them. So they try to match the result without matching the system. And it doesn't translate. Because outcomes are not independent. They are built on layers. And without those layers, there is nothing to amplify the effort. This is why some people stay ahead, not because they are constantly doing more, but because what they've already done is still working for them. And that changes everything. Because once effort begins to persist, you are no longer relying on time alone. You are building something that continues. And continuation is what creates separation over time. At the beginning, the difference is almost invisible. No clear separation, no obvious gap, just small variations in direction. One person connects their effort to something that continues. The other relies only on what they can produce in the moment. And at first, the outcomes look similar. Nothing stands out. But time does not treat those paths equally, because continuation compounds, and repetition stalls. Slowly, quietly, without announcement, days begin to layer, then weeks, then months, and those small differences start interacting, expanding, reinforcing themselves, not through effort alone, but through what effort created. This is when separation becomes visible, not as a sudden jump, but as a growing distance. One person begins to move ahead, without increasing intensity, because their past actions are still active, still producing, still shaping the next step. They are no longer starting from zero, they are building from accumulation. The other remains dependent on output. Each day begins fresh, each result ends where it finishes. There is no extension, no carryover, only repetition. And repetition cannot compete with continuation, because continuation multiplies, while repetition maintains. And over time, multiplication always wins. This is why some people always stay ahead, not because they accelerate suddenly, but because they never reset. Their movement carries forward, so the gap keeps expanding, not through visible effort, but through invisible structure, through assets that persist, through positioning that aligns, through systems that continue, all working in the background. And once that system is in place, falling behind is no longer about speed. It becomes about starting point, because the person ahead is not where they are today. They are where all of their past movement has accumulated. And that accumulation is what you're actually competing against. Not the person, the system behind them.